So the beginning of Perek Ches, it discusses the machlokas regarding the kruvim. Yeah, familiar with that, right? So there's machlokas regarding the kruvim. If the kruvim were facing each other, or if they were facing the bias. Now we have to make clear what kruvim are we talking about? So we're talking about the machlokas in the Gemara. The Gemara. This is outside. This is not inside. So the machlokas in the Gemara Bava Basra is a machlokas regarding the kruvim of that Shlomo HaMelech built. Now, so there are two sets of kruvim that we're discussing. Okay, there's a kruvim that Moshe Rabbeinu had that we just had, two weeks ago in Parshas Truma, right? Those kruvim were on top of the Aron. Okay, the Aron itself was 9 tvachim plus 1 tefach for the kapiros. That's the cover, right? And then the kruvim also were 10 tvachim. Okay, so together the kruvim and the Aron in the Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu built, they were 20 tvachim. Okay, Aron itself was not the Aron. The Mishkan itself was 10 amas. 10 amas, right? Now, so there's a machlokes really if the amas in the Mishkan were at 5 tvachim or 6 tvachim. So but we're going to go with there were 6 tvachim. That's the generally we presume 6 tvachim. So 6 tvachim, that means 10 amas would be 60 tvachim. Right, so 20 amas, which is the Aron, was 1/3 of the Mishkan. Okay, similar proportions existed in Shlomo HaMelech, except the pasuk says that the Heichel, that's the central part, like the Mishkan parallel part, the Heichel was 30 amas tall, and Shlomo HaMelech made additional set of kruvim that were 10 amas tall. Okay, and they stood on the ground. The kruvim themselves stood on the ground. They were 10 amas tall. These gigantic. I'm not sure. I mean, they seemingly they serve the same purpose as the kruvim of the Mishkan. Just everything in the Mishkan was miniature, and when Shlomo HaMelech was building the Beis HaMikdash, this was a more permanent and more, I guess, bigger. Okay. So these kruvim were 10 amas tall, and again, also they were 1/3 of the Heichel. Heichel was 30 amas tall, and they had the same properties, or at least the presumption of the Gemara is that they had the same properties as the kruvim in the Mishkan. Okay, so that's why the Gemara asks from the pasuk, right? So then there are two psukim. There's a psukim regarding the kruvim of Shlomo HaMelech. Regarding those, it says that they were facing the bias, okay, which is the Gemara goes through maybe so big question exactly how they were facing the bias. Maybe it was standing this way, that way, whatever it is. But the point is that there were these kruvim probably on the side. It's not clear exactly also where they were standing. Maybe on the side of the Aron, parallel. A little off to this, whatever it is. However they were standing, but they seemingly served the same purpose, which is that God is called Yoshev HaKruvim. Right, is the dweller of the kruvim, amongst the kruvim. So the kruvim are like the carriers of God's presence in the world. Whether we're talking about the Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim or whether we're talking about Shlomo HaMelech's kruvim, they both serve the same purpose.
How come Yoma doesn't mention anything about it? Because when it talks about like the Kohen Gadol going to the Kodesh HaKodashim, it has a very precise direction as to how he's supposed to walk.
Okay.
But it never mentions anything about the second set of kruvim standing there.
Good question. I don't know.
I think they're talking about Baisheni, aren't they?
No.
There's one part. Remember we discussed.
Probably primarily they're talking about Bayis Sheni. But anyways, but the point is so so these were the main kruvim. The main kruvim in the Beis HaMikdash were the kruvim that Shlomo HaMelech built. Okay, it's not even clear from the Gemara if Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim were present. Maybe the Shlomo HaMelech's kruvim came to replace Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim. I'm not sure. It's hard for me to imagine that, but it's possible. Because again, like they were serving the same purpose, meaning they probably hovered over they were huge. You think about meaning they were 10 amas, right? And their wing spread, each of them was 10 amas wing spread. So together, they had a 20 amas wing spread together. Can you imagine?
20 amas
together, the two kruvim with each meaning each kruv had a 10 amas wingspread. So if you talk about each amma
It's like
is slightly under
width
2
of this
feet,
room.
right?
It's the
Each
width of
amma is
this
slightly
room.
under 2 feet.
20.
So that's 20 feet per crew.
So it's 40.
40 feet to crew them together took up
10
40
meters.
feet space.
It's like whatever, 12 meters.
Right. So they were these, I mean, they're pretty massive structures.
Also hammered out of a single piece of gold?
No, they were made of wood.
Okay.
They were made of wood and
Covered
gold
in
and covered in gold.
Okay.
Right. They would, I mean, imagine these
Right,
things
that was
were
just-
gold.
Yeah.
Right. So these were the kruvim. So again, so by the Shlomo Melech's kruvim, it says that they were facing the bias, whatever that means. Also, but it means that they were facing probably it's machlokes commentators, but probably they were facing the western wall. Which one is the wall? Let me see. You're walking in from the Mizrach, and the western wall was the back of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Was the western wall?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. You're walking,
You're walking
from
like that.
right, but from the east. You're walking,
You're walking
in
from the east.
From the east, and you hitting
Goes
the
up,
western
down.
wall.
Until it was the Mizbeach.
Okay, so so whatever they were facing probably the back of the Beis Hamikdash, possibly. Probably they were facing towards the Aron if they're closer to this way. If they're right over, it's not clear. It's not clear exactly which way. But the bottom line is they were facing the bias. That's the lashon. The lashon of the pasuk is they're facing the bias. That's what it says by Shlomo Melech's kruvim. By Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim, it's clear. It says they're facing ish eloch if they were facing to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Gemara over there that's asking a question, right? Over here it's written this way, over here it's written this way. Really, you could have said, big deal. This one is talking about Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim. This one is talking about Shlomo Melech's kruvim, and there's no comparison. But the Gemara's presumption is because since the kruvim are serving the same purpose, that their mission is identical. So whatever Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim, however they were set up, Shlomo Melech's kruvim should have been set up the same way. That's the presumption.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, one Mandomer says they were facing each other, like Moshe Rabbeinu's pasuk says. The other Mandomer takes as the primary pasuk Shlomo Melech's pasuk that they were facing the bias. And the Gemara asks, what about the first Mandomer? It says in that pasuk that they were facing the bias by Shlomo Melech's kruvim. They were facing the bias. So that Mandomer answers, right? Kan bezman she'Yisrael lo yisin nitzoni sh'malkim, kan bezman she'ein Yisrael lo yisin nitzoni sh'malkim. One is talking about a time when Jews are fulfilling God's will. One is talking about a time when Jews are not fulfilling God's will. So in other words, like we know, miraculously they turned. If right, so he's saying usually they face each other. That's the initial state. But if they're not, then they start turning aside towards the house. Okay, right. So it's this way or that way. Okay. That's one Mandomer. Then the Gemara says, what about the other Mandomer that says that they were facing the house? It says in Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim they were facing each other. On that the Gemara answers the mitzvah that's duty, that they used to be a little bit sideways. They do both. They would look at each other halfway and at the house halfway. So it still was clear there was an emotional connection, so to speak, between the two kruvim, even though they were slightly askew. But they were still partially facing the house. So we're kind of facing the house. Now what we didn't get right was this that everybody agrees that this formula there was still a miraculous nature to the kruvim in the Beis Hamikdash. That when they turned, when Klal Yisrael was not serving Hashem, they moved one way. When Klal Yisrael didn't, right? That's clear according to both opinions.
Yeah, but no one was able to see it.
According to both, one said they were. So according to both opinions, they had the miraculous nature of moving back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's why the Rashi over there in Tosfos say that you couldn't answer according to the second Mandomer that held that the initial position was facing the house. Mm-hmm. You couldn't answer Kan when they're serving Hashem, Kan when they're not serving Hashem, because the presumption is that we're talking about the machlokes between the two shitas is what was the initial setup during the building of the first Beis Hamikdash. Was it facing each other or facing the house? Right? So if you believe the initial setup was facing the house, you presume that the initial setup was according to the ideal state, right? So you can't answer, oh, that's when Jews are not serving Hashem, because you're talking about the ideal set, the initial setup. The initial setup probably follows the ideal state. So that idea that the initial setup only follows the ideal state only makes sense if you believe that there is, that the state can change, right? So then you have to come up with the new answer. The new answer is they were slightly sideways. But that was the ideal state, and then it could change. As if the Jews are not following the ways of Hashem, so then it moves further apart. When they are following the ways, it moves back closer apart. But they were always kind of, the only question is, what's the idea? The machlokes is, what is the ideal state, or what is the initial state, which is the ideal state. According to the first mandomer, the initial state is facing each other. According to the second mandomer, the initial state was slightly apart. Okay? So that's something that wasn't clear. Now, the Gemara says, and he's going to bring this later, that by Shloisha Regolim, they had this ceremony, they would slightly raise the paroichas, the curtain, to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to give people a glimpse into the...
But people were standing nowhere close to see it.
Well, again, these Kruvim were pretty massive.
No, I understand, but you can't raise slightly parochas. I mean, I'm just saying, the way it was built is you have a mizbeach that was covering the door. The mizbeach was outside of the entrance to get in.
Right, you can...
Right? So you cannot see it directly because mizbeach basically covers most
But we're
of
talking about...
I understand.
Giant statues.
You need to completely open the parochas, and I don't think
so I don't know. No, why not? I don't know how much they opened it, but I guess they opened it enough to give people a glimpse into the Kruvim. Okay, so that's this part. Okay, so the question is, so that's the Gemara in Baba Basra. Now we understand the Gemara in Baba Basra, or more or less. The question that he wants to know, why, according to the second mandomer, would there be this idea of slightly askew, slightly aside? Why don't they just all agree that they were facing each other? What's the idea of the second mandomer saying that, hey, no, the initial state was slightly apart? What's the benefit of being slightly apart? Why don't you just set up facing each other and no big deal? Okay, that's the question. And the way he's going to answer that question is via connecting that Gemara that we still don't fully grasp, and hopefully we'll get a better grasp of it now, as the Machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what is the ideal state in terms of balance between Parnasa and Torah learning and scholarship, right? Okay, so from here I want to see again inside. So v'ha'inyan hu k'moy shomru perak Eitzim Vorchim. So the explanation is like they said in the parak of Eitzim Vorchim. Tanu Rabbon, the rabbis have taught v'asafta deganecha. You will gather your grain. Lefish Ne'amar, it says in a different pasuk, lo yomush sefer Torah zem picho, that this sefer Torah should not cease from your mouth. Yochel dvorim kiksovam. Should I take that pasuk literally, that a Torah could not cease from your mouth? Talmud loimer v'asafta deganecha. So that's why it has to teach me that v'asafta deganecha, and you will gather your grain. What does that mean? How do you reconcile the two different psukim? Hanheg bohen minhag derech eretz. Practice with them the practice of derech eretz, of the way of the land. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. These are the words of Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel says, find the balance. You do derech eretz, which is meaning take care of your sustenance and you learning. Okay, and then that would be still considered. The Torah should not cease from your mouth. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, "Efsher, is it possible? Odom chorish b'shas charisha. If a person goes plowing at the time of plowing, and then it continues v'zoreh b'shas zriya, and he plants at the times of planting, and he koitzer b'shas ktsira, right? And meaning he goes through the entire process of the entire cycle of farming, right? There's not going to be any time for learning. If parnasa sucks you in. Torah, what's going to be regarding the Torah? Ella, rather, Bizman, at the time when the Jews are fulfilling God's will, their work, their jobs are completed, their work is done through others. Uvizman she'ein Yisrael lo'isen Ritzono shel Mokum, and in the time when they are not doing the will of Hashem, Malachta Nasis al Yidei Atzman. That's when they have to take care of their own work, their own parnasa. Shenemar, as it says, V'asafta de Genecha. You should gather your grain. Okay, so that's the Gemara in Brachas. Okay, so we have to just summarize. So we have two opinions. So one opinion. So we have two psukim that are contradictory. One pasuk says the Torah should not cease from your mouth. The other pasuk says you will gather your grain. How do we reconcile the two? Rabbi Shmuel says, find the balance. Find the balance. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, no, there is no way to find the balance. There's no such thing. If you're going to be parnasa will suck you in, there's no way to find the balance. So how do you do? What do? You have to choose. Which one do you choose? You choose Torah. What's going to be with parnasa? Oh, don't worry. Somebody will take care of it for you. But it says you will gather your grain. No, that pasuk is still referring to when you're not fulfilling God's will. So then you have to take care of it on your own. But if you are fulfilling God's will, in the word, which in words in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai means complete and total dedication to spiritual pursuits, then somebody else will take care of your physical needs. Okay, so that's the machlokes. The problem is, and we are right here now. Well, the chayra tmua, but there's a big problem here. The muki likra, because it sets up the pasuk v'asafta de genecha v'asafta de genecha k'she'eino isin ritzono shel Mokum, when they are not fulfilling the will of Hashem. And that's a big problem. Because that pasuk, where is that pasuk? That pasuk is located in the second paragraph of Shema, right after the words and if it will be when you will listen el mitzvah to my commandments, le'ahava, to love Hashem, u'la'avda, and to serve Him b'chol levavchem, with all your hearts, v'alo kamar, and on that aspect it says v'asafta de genecha, and you will gather your grain. So don't tell me. How could Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai say that you will gather your grain is referring to a state of not doing the will of Hashem, when it's specifically, clearly from the pasuk, it seems to be that it's going on specifically on, and you will do the will of Hashem. So, where does he get this from? So, aval ha'inyan. So first he says, before we understand that, first you have to understand really what the machlokas is about.
So here's my question. Isn't like in the beginning when we were technically cursed to work for our food? It
Correct.
says you have to work for it.
Right.
So how are we missing that whole very first commandment that was given to us to work for towards our food, and just assume that
It's not, who says it's commandment?
It's not a commandment.
It's a
but
curse.
It's a curse, but it was given by Hashem. It's not like somebody else is curse. Yeah.
So
why can't you just say that, I'm gonna assume by learning it's gonna provide the food for me, even though that's not what I was cursed with from Hashem?
Meaning, how could the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Okay, so good question. Okay, so let's see if we as we go along, let's see if it answers. Let's see if we have a question after we're done. So but first he says, before you understand Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you have to understand Rabbi Shmuel, which is seemingly the easier one to understand, right? Balance it out, right? That should be the easier one to understand, but it's not so simple. He says, what does that mean? Aval ha'inyan. Here's the matter. Kivadai, of course, she'ein das Rabbi Shmuel shehei rishus nesun le'odom. You can't think that the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel shehei rishus nesun, that there's permission given to an odom lifrosh, to separate chas v'shalom af zman mu'at me'asek Torah, even for a little bit from involvement in the Torah. So even Rabbi Shmuel, who says you balance it out, that does not mean that a person really has the right to separate himself from the Torah, even for a little bit. Okay? And to be involved in parnasa. And be completely separated from Asik HaTorah at that point. Okay? There's no such thing as complete separation from the Torah, even according to Rabbi Shmuel. That's what he's saying.
So then what's the balance?
So Amnam, however, Ramazah Rabbi Shmuel b'Lashono HaKodesh, he hinted to what he really means in his holy language. Hanheg bohen minhag derech eretz. Practice with them the minhag of derech eretz. Who are the with them? What's practice with them? With what? Rotzeloimer, he means to say imohen, with them, im hadivrei Torah, with the words of Torah. Practice with the words of Torah, derech eretz. Practice with the words of Torah, derech eretz. Hainu, what does that mean? Shigam be'oisa ha'eis, even at that time, v'sho, mu'etes, in that small amount of time, she'ata oisik b'parnasa, that you're involved in parnasa, kidei hatzorich, in accordance to your need, v'ha'hechrach, and your requirement, l'chayos nefesh, for your survival, al kol ponim, still in all, b'rayone machshavtecho, in your innermost thoughts, tehei rak b'divrei Torah. You should be thinking only with divrei Torah. Again, so the mashal that we gave is like this: when a person is really in love, right? When a person is really in love, let's say that you just met a girl and is really connected with her, so he could be working, he could be in his regular job doing his regular thing, right? But at the same time, his mind is constantly going back to the one he loves, because he's just like, right now he's like so on such a high, like he can't, he's always thinking. He's doing his, no matter what job he's doing, he's still somehow that connection, that flicker of connection never goes away. After many years of marriage, okay, it's like, oh yeah, I have a wife, it's like your job like sucks you in, but in the beginning, when things are very good, so you're constantly, there's always that spark, right? So the point is, if a person has a real love for Hashem's and Hashem's Torah, right? So even he's constantly, this is what he's living with. He's constantly dwelling on these questions. Not only that, I mean, like you see something and this reminds me of a shaila that there was on this daf and that gemara. Oh, this is interesting. Or something happens to work. You're always connecting it back to different things that you learn, because you have that intrinsic connection that's always there, right? So of course Rabbi Shmuel doesn't mean, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I turn my Torah brain off and I turn on my work brain, and from 5 p.m. on I turn my work brain. No, the point is, even Rabbi Shmuel agrees that every Jew has to be connected to such a degree to Torah that he's constantly, somewhere, at least somewhere in the back of his mind, there's always that living connection.
But what about people who say that, like, whenever you actually do that during work, it's like you're stealing from your work?
Right. So good point. Of course, if you cannot, in the middle of your work, open up a sefer and and start learning, and your clients are coming, and like I'll be with you, I'll be with you shortly, and obviously again I'm talking about that. That's why the mashal I gave, it's like. It does not interfere where you work. It's in the back of your head, but that connection is just so strong that even when you're doing everything else, you're always somehow connected to it. I don't know how else to bring it out. Okay, but the point is that there is an underlying, inalienable, totally, very strong bond to the words of Torah that's always ever present. Maybe at some points it's more, some points it's less, but it's always there in the back of our minds. Okay, v'chein Rava, and similarly Rava over there in that same Gemara, Omar l'Talmidov, he says to his students, B'yumei Nisan of Tishrei, in the days of Nisan and Tishrei, lo tischazu kamoi, don't appear before me. Daika, it's also very precise. Don't appear before me. What does that mean? Don't come to the Beis HaMedrash. You can't imagine that the students of Rava for those 2 months did not pick up a sefer for those 2 months for a second. So can you imagine? These are full-time rabbis that are learning in the Beis HaMedrash. Tell me for 2 months they went to work and they did not pick up a sefer. Obviously, they obviously learned in their available time, right? He was just telling them, this is not the time for you to spend mainly in the Beis HaMedrash. Go and concentrate on your parnosa, like we said, because those 2 months they could have provided for themselves enough parnosa to sit more comfortably learning the rest of the year. So he says, invest more of your efforts now, right? But obviously they still had connection in their house, right? They weren't betelim completely from Me'esek Torah, from learning Torah, gam beveisom, even in their house, be'elohim, during those days. Okay, good. So Rabbi Shmuel agrees that underlying there is a strong connection to the Torah even when you're working. Okay, V'omru shom, and over there again the Seg Gemara says Harbe also ki Rabbi Shmuel. Many did like Rabbi Shmuel. Also beyodam, and it succeeded in their hands. Meaning, what succeeded in their hands? Both things. Meaning, many did like Rabbi Shmuel, and they accomplished both things. They accomplished a comfortable living, and they accomplished strong learning, strong knowledge, right? But Harbe also Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Many did like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. V'loy also beyodam, and they did not accomplish. Meaning, what? They didn't accomplish parnasa for obvious reason, because they weren't they weren't doing it, and they didn't. The problem is they didn't even accomplish learning because they constantly felt lacking. They constantly felt insecure about their parnasa, so their mind wasn't into it. So they didn't accomplish that either. Right? So now he explained Hainu Rabim Dafka. I have to understand over here it's dafka. It's very precise. The Gemara is precise that many did like Rabbi Shmuel and many did Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. The key word here is many. Kivada hamoin, for the general populace, kemat bilti efsher, it's almost impossible. Sheyasmidu kol yimehem rak be'esek Torah. It's impossible for them to have the tmidus, that constancy of all their days of learning, right? For the general populace, that's not a possibility to be completely devoted to learning, right? So that's what it means that Harbe also Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, many did like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and they weren't successful because they weren't even cut out for it. They should not even for some time to separate for the involvement of Parnosas Mezonis Klal. And about the general populace is what it says, Kol Torah she'eina mamalocha, that any Torah learning that is not accompanied by work, right? What does it say? It says it's going to come to nothing, right? So general populace need to accompany their learning with work, because that balance, not only for the sake of parnasa, that balance helps them to have a stronger learning as well. Okay? Aval yochid, but one second, but certain individuals, le'atzmai, each individual for himself, that is possible to him, for whom it's possible to be completely involved in his learning, and in his service of God, blessed be He. Of course, there's an obligation on him, not to separate avzman mu'at mitayra, not even to a little bit to separate from the Torah avodah and service, le'esek parnasa chas v'shalom, to be involved in parnasa at all. Right? Ukedas Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, like the opinion of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So what he's saying is, there is the general idea, the general populace, of course. Everybody agrees. Do a balance between work and learning, but of course, again, there is an intimate connection that's always ever present, even when a person is working, because that's his main cheshik in life. That's his main desire in life, to get into God's brain, to get into that knowledge, to really get involved and to really understand. But he can't do it 24/7. He's not cut out for it. So he balances out based on his own needs. Some people more, some people less, but everybody's different. Everybody balances out to their own abilities, right? And in the end, hopefully, he'll succeed in both aspects. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, right, says, yes, but what about the individual? What about the individual that knows that he could dedicate his whole life to Torah scholarship? What about that individual? So he says that individual has to completely dedicate himself to Torah scholarship, has to move to Liquid and sit and learn 24/7. Now, one second. So we had a problem. So what's the machloikas then? Where's the machloikas? It's no machlokes. They all agree, right? One says talking about the general populace. One is talking about individuals. But it's clear from the Gemara that there is a machlokes. Okay, so let's see this Hagah, and then we will. What is it? All right, let's see this Hagok, and then we'll see if we could answer that question. I think I have an answer, hopefully. Okay. All right. So l'chein, so now he says l'chein. Therefore, b'parsha rishona shel Kriya Shema, in the first parsha of Kriya Shema, right? Ksiv ubechol me'oidecha. It's written, and with all your might. Mechol me'oidecha, with all your me'oid. Me'oid really means very much, right? Me'oid, right? B'chol me'oidecha means with all your, whatever, veracity. Let's translate it that way. Parsha v'hoya, but in the second parsha, like siv u'b'chol me'oidechem, it doesn't say with all your might, right? Why not? Ki parsha Shema kula b'loshen yochid nemer, because the first parsha of Shema is all written in singular. V'yochid she'efsher loy, and for an individual that is possible to him, tzarich l'kayim, he has to fulfill the words lo yomush sefer HaTorah zeh mipicha, right? He has to fulfill the words that the sefer HaTorah should not cease from your mouth. Dvarim kiksav and mamash. He has to fill those words up literally. He has to do them exactly, completely, right? V'lechein nemar. So therefore, in the first chapter of Shema, it says b'chol me'odecha, with all your might. Peirush. The Gemara says, what does it mean? B'chol me'odecha, with all your might. B'chol me'moincha, with all your possessions, with all your money, right? With all your might is referring to your physical possessions, your money. What does that mean with all your money? Don't get involved with parnasa at all, but give up on all your physical efforts, not needs, but all your efforts. You can't really give up on your physical needs; they're needs. But you give up on the pursuit of fulfilling your physical needs and concentrate only on the love of Hashem, which is learning Torah. Aval parsha v'hoya, but the second parsha v'hoya shenemer b'loshen rabim, that's the entire parsha is in plural. L'rabim, for the plurality, for the populace, kimat muchrachim, they're basically muchrachim, forced leisasik al kolponim me'at, at least a little bit, to be involved gam berevach momen l'chay nefesh, for the procurement of money for their survival. L'chein l'ksiv bo uv'chol me'oidechem. Therefore, in the second parsha, it doesn't say uv'chol me'oidechem, which it says b'chol levavchem, b'chol nafshechem, and stop. It doesn't say b'chol me'oidechem. In the first parsha, it says b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, uv'chol me'oidecha. So he says that's the difference. The first parsha is singular, so it's talking about that individual that can reach those heights, and therefore can dedicate even total physical dedication to God's service. And the second part is talking about the general populace. Good.
But if we say both of them together, how is that an answer?
Why?
Because you're saying part one and part two.
We are saying part one and part two, but there's an idea that there's still two ways of serving God. There's a general populace way, and then there is the individual way. So you have to know where you are, right? Where do you belong? Are you going to be with you have to know yourself. Not everybody's the same. Right? V'hagam, now he says, this is where I think the answer to the question is, what's the machlokes? V'hagam she'adayin lo yizu haderech v'amadrega hagavoya. Now, even though this is not the derech, this is not the way, v'amadrega, and the level, the high level, hagavoya shebegavoya, the high of the high, l'fi amitas ritzoyno yizborach shmoy ledas rashbi, according to the true will of Hashem, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shem Bar Yochai, right? Meaning that second chapter, according to Rabbi Shem Bar Yochai, is not expressing the utmost ideal, right? The first chapter is really expressing the utmost ideal. The second chapter is not expressing the utmost ideal. Im kol zeh, now of course he will say, you can't say that Rabbi Shimon will say, the second chapter is referring to not fulfilling God's will. That can't be, right? When they a little bit diverge themselves in order to procure their livelihood. Ube'eis oskum parnosa, and at the moment of their involvement on parnosa, libam noig bechachma, even though we're following Rabbi Shmuel, that their heart is still, pursuing wisdom. Umeharhem b'divrei Torah, and they're contemplating about the words of Torah, v'yiras Hashem, and the fear of God. Ule Rabbi Shmuel, zuhi ikar ritzoyne yizbarach, and according to Rabbi Shmuel, it is the primary will of Hashem, b'anhogas klal hamoin, in directing the general populace. So now these are the key words. Upluktosim, and their argument is mahi, what is ikar ritzoyne yizbarach, the primary will of Hashem, v'amadrega hayoser gavoya, that the madrega that's highest, b'anogas klal hamoin, in the directing of the general populace. So let me explain that.
Okay.
So what I think he's saying is like this. He's saying everybody agrees that there are individuals need, can dedicate themselves 100% to Torah learning. Everybody agrees, and then he's going to prove that later. He's going to prove that because in the desert, we see that in the desert, no question, there's no argument. If you ask Rabbi Shmuel, what's the way of the Jews in the desert who just received the Torah? Should they be planting wheat and collecting and farming? He says, no, they have man. What are you talking about? Okay, 100%, no question. Their needs are provided. Their clothes don't wither. They are set. They have the one job to do, and that job is to get this Torah thing that they're just coming down now. Get it straight, right? There's no question that everybody agrees in that situation, right? The question is now, in our real world, not in the cloud of glory world, but in the real world, what is our ideal state? And again, the way I understand it, it's like this. So it's very important generally, let's say for me, let's say the real world is never like the ideal, right? The real world is never like the ideal. But I think it's, before you can plan how you want to conduct yourself in any situation, you need to first understand what the ideal is, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the way, at least I think of it. I want to know what's the ideal situation. Then I want to know what's the reality. And then I judge how to fit my reality based on an ideal. So I'm thinking of it, let's say meaning like, let's say I have, so the Wilkin ideal is like a vacuum. It's pulling me towards it. It's there. I'm never going to reach it, but it's important for it to be there because it's pulling me in that direction as I make my decisions.
Who sets
Without
that ideal? You do?
What?
Who sets that ideal? You do?
No, whatever it is. I'm just going in general. Yeah. I'm just going specifically in any situation. Whatever I think of my ideal is. I don't know. Again, whatever the case may be. Again, let's say for my students, right? Yeah. Ideally, I'm planning every kid should go to Harvard. Yeah. Let's say, right? Now, I know that maybe only one kid is going to go to Harvard. But the way I talk to each kid, you're going to Harvard, right? That could be one approach, right? You could be one approach. And why am I doing that? Because because if I help him reach for the stars, right? Maybe he'll get halfway there and he'll get to NYU, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. Right? If I tell him, you could really make it to NYU, he's going to end up in Brooklyn College, right? These are let's say, right? Yeah. Right? So the machlokas, on the other hand, that's one. So Rabbi Shmuel is saying, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying, always aim for the ideal. Even to the general populace, when you are teaching them what to do, you always talk about the stars. Exactly. Shoot for the ideal of the utmost ideal. Right? Rabbi Shmuel is saying, I disagree with you. Why would you disagree with me? I'm not saying that they should be. I agree with you that they should not be learning 24/7. I'm just saying that's how you have to inspire them. Right? Rabbi Shmuel says no, because you're like when an ideal is totally off the map, right? It's not realistic. You can't even begin to talk to them that way. You gotta talk an ideal that's within their grasp, right? Within their picture of reality. This is the ideal that you're referring to is not even within their picture of reality. What are you talking about Harvard when this kid can't do arithmetic? Like what are you doing? Tell them about NYU, tell them about something that maybe he feels like if he really works hard, he can get there. At least then he will really work hard because he feels like it's within his grasp, right? So the machlokas, I think, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is how do you what's your uppermost direction? How do you inspire people? Do you inspire them to heights of heights, or do you inspire them to attainable heights? Right? Which ideal do you... Both, of course, in reality, they all agree that the utmost ideal is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's ideal. But the question is, how do you generally guide, right? Generally guide the people.
That's actually very interesting.
Okay, so I guess we'll stop here.
Go ahead.